Welcome to PM Express Business Edition. There's been talk about Ghana's total debt stock and how it has hit record levels. There have been several proposals on how to contain the situation. But should we be worried about this development? Or maybe things are under control? Again, what about the current financial structure of Ghana and how it is contributing to this? What about all those other issues that have been put forward and how we are managing the economy, politics, and development of the financial sector? Well, today on PM Express Business Edition, I'll be engaging a financial economist, a former, and let me say, one of the longest serving technical advisors at the Ministry of Finance, and he's also the current chief executive of Sam Capital. I'm talking about Dr. Sam Mensah. And he will be my guest on PM Express tonight as we look at managing Ghana's rising debt stock and the financial sector. And why is it of such interest to all of us? The views of a former technocrat, understanding and managing the situation, and how can we get things under control as a country in terms of those who are managing the situation. All these things wrapped up on PM Express Business Edition. And Doc, thank you so much for joining us on the PM. It's been a while.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Where have you been? I mean, hiding yourself?
Well, I've been busy, running Sam Capital. It's a slightly different ball game from being a technical advisor at the ministry. So that has been, after being away from it for a while, I think it presented a new, interesting challenge, especially given the financial sector restructuring and crisis that we had in Ghana.
Doc, I'll be getting back to you to still get more understanding on what you're doing, and also something that you've already done. Put together some wonderful book that is actually guiding our discussion on PM Express actually right now. We'll take a short break and be right back on PM Express Business Edition as we look at Ghana's rising debt stock and the financial sector. How can we better manage it? We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to PM Express Business Edition as we talk about Ghana's rising debt stock and even our whole financial sector, Ghana's stock exchange, the capital market, and all those things. Have we managed that space very well? And do we have a citizenry that appreciate the issues very well? And also about our debt stock. Is it much ado about nothing? Or listen, hey, it is a clear peace and danger ahead of us. Well, somebody who was behind the scenes at the Ministry of Finance, doing all the engagement and understanding as a technical advisor, a financial economist, and also chief executive of Sam Capital, an investment I hope I get the description right. Is it an investment house or a finance house and all those things? Dr. Sam Mensah is my guest on PM Express Business Edition. And Doc, I was asking you about what have you been up to? So back again into private sector, how smooth or how easy has it been? Sometimes those in the private sector say that you guys technocrats don't understand us. And now you're back into the space where you were already at the other side, putting together programs, policies, and all the rest. How has it been getting back into the private sector?
It was a bit of an adjustment. Actually, in the years that I was away at the Ministry of Finance, my firm was still running, but it was being managed independently. So when I came, the first thing is I had to learn how to run a company again, meet my revenue and expense targets and pay salaries and all that. But the most difficult thing was really the fact that I came back at a time when the financial sector was going through a crisis. As you know, we have fund managers and investment advisors. So confidence is extremely important. We persuade people to leave their money with us to invest. And they have to have the confidence that when I go to redeem my money, it's going to be available for me and it will be making a respectable return. But because of the crisis, there was a flight. If you like, a flight.
People moving capital away.
Yeah, exactly. A flight of customers from the market, which means that the rate of mobilization has been relatively slow. And fund managers really survive on a very small margin.
On the capital that people bring, on the funds that people...
funds that you're managing. Yeah. So if there's a slowdown in the flow of the funds, it means you financially you're struggling. So I think this is not a good time for fund managers at all.
You guys are struggling?
Oh, some of us are doing okay.
Breaking even, I should say.
Exactly. But some are struggling. I think it will take time. There's about 83 fund managers still in business, and scrambling for a market which is actually shrinking in the sense that investors are retreating from the market, and so that's a challenge.
I mean, it might be a good time to talk about this whole financial sector cleanup, and some would ask that for you, the approach, could it have been better than what we did? Or listen, I mean, the good ones need to survive, so listen, I don't care. Or it could have been done better.
I mean, that debate has been going on for some time. Yeah. I mean, there's really no clear scientific way of determining whether an alternative approach would have been better.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that easy. One way is the way that we did it.
Yeah.
The other would have been to continue to support these failing financial institutions and hope that they recover. And to me, I think the government of the day has to take a stand on one or the other of the alternatives.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's so easy to say that we could have kept them going.
I ask this question because of the aftershocks, and some would say that the end might always justify the means. Looking at the aftershocks right now, that a sector that was already struggling to convince people that you can keep our money with us, we're getting there. Now this thing comes in and it takes us back. And that is why you want to look at the end in trying to justify the approach, Doc.
Yeah. It's a hard choice. I mean, I don't envy the ones who have to make that decision. Either way, there are costs and benefits, and it's very difficult to exactly measure what the trade-off is. You know, I'm a fund manager, and I think that it actually needed a cleanup.
Yeah.
Because there were too many things going wrong in the industry. For example, they were promising very unrealistic rates of return, which they could not deliver on, and it got to a point where so many investors were running to the SEC to complain about them not being able to redeem their investments. And so something needed to be done. For the SEC, it needed to do something. And also its capacity to regulate had really been challenged.
Yeah. And
so it needed to do something to, become more efficient, consolidate its activities. And so I think it was justified in the case of the SEC. I'm not sure I can say the same for the banks.
I was going through a book that you've written, and it's called Inside Out. And it's a book that you try to catalog your work at the Ministry of Finance as a technical advisor for 10 good years, if I'm right on that one, and moving again into the private sector. I mean, I going through one of the chapters, you talked about why you have to put together this book, and I'm not done reading through, but a lot of interesting revelations, and our viewers will get to know about some of the reasons why you had to put this thing together. And it was interesting about people appreciating the workings of the Ministry of Finance, our whole financing structure of the country, and all those things. I mean, one would ask that again, you hope to open things up really to people out there to appreciate the workings of the Ministry of Finance.
Yeah, I consider myself extremely lucky to have gotten the chance in public service and to be actually able to work very closely with 3 different ministers over the years. And I thought it would be interesting for Ghanaians to know how the workings of government at the level at which I was operating. I was not a minister, I was a technical person, but going from one project to the other, one program to the other, one policy to another, and the dynamics involved, the negotiations that have to take place before a decision is taken.
But you were very close to the ministers. I mean, coming to the Ministry of Finance, some would say that if you take the political heads from there, you were one of the most influential people at the Ministry of Finance, and that's a fact.
It was a coincidence of things. The ministers that I worked for happened to be people that I knew for a long time, and they were my friends.
Baredu.
Exactly.
Let's recall. I remember you talked about Baredu, Asafumafo, and then featured like Setepe as well.
And then Corbin Dufo.
Yeah. So these are kind of...
I didn't really work under Asafumafo directly, but he actually was instrumental in my entry into the ministry when he was minister.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I did a couple of things for him, and I think he liked them, so he continued to involve me in the work of the ministry. And then finally, Barry came and said, "Look, you are here all the time, so why don't you just come and join us?" And we started that process.
But for you, looking in at the public service and all the rest, how easy and difficult it is marrying that with politics, and where a government thinks that I have to introduce this tax to raise revenue, and you also think that, listen, technically this doesn't match up in terms of going ahead with this political decision. How easy or difficult where you have to tell the politician that, listen, this is not the way to go, we cannot advance this payment, but politically they think they have to do it?
It's difficult. You have to walk a very fine line. And I always had to keep reminding myself that I don't have a democratic mandate. The ministers have a democratic
So yours stop at advising.
Exactly.
It is love with him to take that decision of whether I'll take Dr. Sam Mensah's advice or not.
Be accountable to the public. I don't have to be accountable. So I kept reminding myself that, look, he still has to be accountable to the population, to the people of Ghana. And therefore, at some point, your technical guidance has to give way to political reality. And decision making at that level is very complicated.
How complicated was being close to some of these four ministers then, and when you know that this decision is a bad one, but politically it's prudent?
You know, it's one of those decisions where there's no, in finance we say there's no corner solution. The corner solution is either this or that. There's virtually no policy decision that is a 0-1 choice. There's always a trade-off, cost and benefit. And so you have to find yourself a balance somewhere on that curve that is broadly acceptable. Because if you don't do that, then you're going to pay a very high price. Either way, you can pay a high price politically, or you can pay a high price technically. So the minister is always navigating a compromise position, which takes into consideration the science or the technicals, and also takes into consideration the political realities. It's not easy.
But when you know it's a bad one, what about you?
When it's a bad one, you tell the minister that it's a bad one, but you will not be the one going up front and telling the rest of the world that this is a bad one. And the thing is, if I'm working for a minister, I also see it as my responsibility not to eclipse the minister. In other words, I should not take over the minister's communication work, the work of persuading his colleagues, persuading the public that this has to be done. Okay, so it's tricky, but I don't think I would have survived
3 or 4 ministers as a technical advisor.
Exactly.
One of the most senior positions at the ministry there.
Exactly.
Being at the Ministry of Finance as a technical advisor, political interference, the minister is a political animal, let me use that in quote. Was it something that happened always?
It happened all the time. You mean by political interference, you're looking at political interference?
Decisions, payments, when you know that the country is not in a good financial position to advance X payment.
It happens.
There is pressure on the minister to sign the check for X project.
It happens all the time. It starts all the way from the president. I mean, the president might go and give a speech somewhere and then make a promise. that something is going to be done. You know, either a road is going to be done or some school is going to be built. These things are not always programmed.
Why don't you tell the president? I mean, I believe that in terms of the finance minister, he has a speed dial call or a 24/7 access to the president. Mr. President, I'm sorry we cannot fund this project. I'm sorry we cannot do this. Well, what is stopping the minister? And you being that right arm advisor with all these 4 finance ministers and telling them that, listen, tell the president we can't do this. It is something projects.
But he's ultimately responsible.
Yeah.
He's ultimately responsible to the people of Ghana.
Yeah.
You know, so if the president insists that this is the way, I mean, it's also part of the whole leadership thing. If he says that this is the direction in which I want to go, he has the mandate of the people to do that, or to make his mistakes and then account for them. So I think that if you insist on your solutions to problems, sooner or later you run afoul of the establishment. So it's not easy.
I see.
It's not easy.
Let's come to understanding the whole financial structure of the country and even at the Ministry of Finance. And around your time, I know that HIPIC came up, Eurobond came up, and all the rest, and blah blah. I mean, the big question in the room has always been about our debt stock rising. And being at the ministry there, was this something that always hit your mind when you're going out to spend, when you're putting together the budget? Because the argument out there is that we are borrowing too much as a country. And having worked as a technical advisor, which is one of the most senior positions of the ministry there, to the minister, was this an issue that came up during your meetings, during your budget preparations, during your decision to go out and do the Eurobonds and all the rest?
It came up all the time. I think ministers are very conscious of the fact that unsustainable debt is something that we should avoid. But we are in a political environment where there are rising expectations. The public is expecting a lot. They're expecting social amenities, healthcare, education, roads, everything. And so the pressure on the ministers is very, very severe, especially on the president. He has to provide so much for the people of Ghana. And so you know the consequences of excessive debt. You try to restrain it, but the pressure to push it up is always very strong because of the fact that the country needs so much. There's so much that we need to do, you know. So at some point you have to put the brakes down and say, okay, look, this is as far as I can go. And that choice is a very lonely choice.
But some will say that, I mean, following the workings of the Ministry of Finance since I grew up, I didn't get this essence when you came out and preparing your budget. When you came out, we were going onto the capital market to issue 3 billion, 2 billion.
Believe me, that's why I decided to write the book, because it's not as if in the ministry they were not thinking about.
But that's something to say that it did not reflect in what you were doing. That if you were indeed conscious about the fact that we are taking on too much debt as a country and we can't pay for that one, we should see that in those policy programs. We should see that in those bond issuance. And you were a very senior person. Another politicians were not listening to you, Doc, in terms of our debt stock rising.
The nice thing about being an advisor is that, a technical advisor, is that you don't have to go and stand up and defend your choices.
Yeah.
But the minister has to stand up and defend their choices. And the choices are they are economic and they are political. And all 2 factors have to play a role in those choices. And that's why it appears as if they are not seeing what you are seeing, but they are. But they have to make some choices. That's the difficulty.
We got to a stage where we classified ourselves, or per the United Nations and World Bank classification, we grew into a low middle income country. Did we rush in going to the Eurobond market? Because some are also saying that, yeah, we were excited. One of the few countries in the sub-region to test the bond market. I remember those times, the press release and all the rest and all those things. We were basking in that glory. We were excited. But some were saying that we were not growing the required revenue, the requirement that comes with a developing country going into the capital market, going to the commercial market to borrow?
Well, you know, the country is about what, 64 years or 60-something years old now. And a lot of things have changed since we became independent. Number one, the size of programs that we need to implement are becoming bigger and bigger. I mean, 15 years ago, you know, if Ghana got a donor-funded support of 50 million, it was a lot of money. Today, it probably will not be a lot of money. So Ghana reached the point where you needed larger and larger amounts of capital, which were simply not available from the donor partners. You couldn't get $1 billion from a donor to do a major road construction. And so the country needed to graduate from bilateral loans to commercial loans so that it can get the monies in the quantums that are desired for the kind of infrastructure that we have. Secondly, you know, it's extremely time-consuming. The transaction costs of negotiating bilateral loans are very high. I mean, we did a study and found that on average it takes about 2 to 3 years from conception of an idea
secure a bilateral loan.
To secure a bilateral loan. But I can get into the Eurobond market, and within 3 months I'll be back home with my money. And so, as the country grew and our needs, you know, grew, we needed to find alternative sources of financing, and that is why the Eurobond came in. And so, we cannot continue, or we couldn't have continued on the same path. We needed to diversify our sources of funding. It's not as if the Eurobond came in as free money to spend. No.
Did we have that at the back of our mind? Because there were several reports even about the fact that some of these monies from our first Eurobond didn't go to the projects that were supposed to go. And if they are not free money again, and that, it comes back to the advice, did the politician have at the back of their mind, did the Minister of Finance have at the back of their mind that we're going to police these funds to ensure that I went out to ask for these funds from investors and they will go to X project, it will go to this road project. It won't go anywhere. It appears that we didn't do that.
I mean, there are two issues. One is going to the Eurobond market in the first place, which I personally think was justified, given the circumstances that we were dealing with.
You don't think we rushed?
No, I don't think we rushed at all. I think Ghana reaching a middle-income status also meant that it had to rise up to responsibilities for running its economy, which you could no longer handle with the tools available to us then. But not spending the money as you indicated is a violation of the principle of trust. You know, because when the Eurobond lenders give you their money, they're lending you the money trusting that you are going to use it for what you said you would do. So if that is happening, then we have to take a serious view of it.
And sorry to cut you in.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry to cut in. I mean, it brings back the question about our financial administration and financial prudence, because another reason why our debt stock is ballooning has to do with funds, misappropriation of funds and all the rest. Do you think that we need to get a little bit more tough on public funds or public officials that misuse these funds? I mean, after the assets.
I think that's one way of actually bringing our debt stock under control is to improve the efficiency of our spending.
Haven't we done that?
We try to, but I don't think we're doing nearly everything that we have to do. By efficiency of spending means value for money, more and more value for money analysis. We need to be able to put a lot of we need to put the brakes on when we have to.
Do you think we need to do that now? Because we recently went to the debt market again, and it appears that we might go again. Do we need to put on the brakes now?
I'm not sure it's so easy to say that, because the country still needs a lot of things, needs to do a lot of things. But we can, if you look at the projections of the government, we're actually expecting to go down a trajectory where we will return to maybe the debt levels that we had a few years ago. Or you don't believe that's possible?
But Doc, don't you, some will say that those are big English, financial term and all the rest. For that man on the street, and sorry for my ignorance, I look at the total debt stock at the end of the year, over 200 and something billion. And I'm worried because it has implications on taxes, it has implications on my ability to borrow at a cheaper rate, it has implications on the Ghana cedi stability. And that is where the person, as in the rate of growth and stability, those are some would say big English.
I think one of the significant factors is really the politics, our political governance.
You think the politicalize that talks issue?
I think that the politics is very important in terms of understanding why we keep borrowing. Because you look at the system that we run. Governments have the incentive to win the next election. Every government has an incentive to, they want to win the next election. How do you win the next election? Part of the problem is providing for the needs of the people so that they will vote for you. And so the political system actually comes into collision with sound economic management. How do we marry the two? It's not easy. It's not easy to say that, okay, in fact, it's not in the politicians' interest to actually ignore the political dimension. Otherwise, they will not be in power.
No, some would say the political economy.
Exactly. It's a political economy issue. It's not, that's one of the lessons that I learned very quickly.
In public service, coming from private sector.
Private sector, but I remember I was also a political scientist before I became anything else. And so I was quite sensitive to the expectations that the people had, how politicians were reacting to them, and then its conflict with the sound economic principles of managing debt. You have to look at the whole, it's a potpourri of things.
Issues.
You have to look at it in that large context. If you're going strictly by the economics, we should stop borrowing. Or
we should stop borrowing.
We should slow down.
Practical, we should slow down.
But it's not practical.
So then how do we deal with the rising debt stick issue? Because I mean, if I go by the World Bank's same principles and all the rest, it appears that we are high risk of debt distress. At the next debt service review, there's a likelihood we could slip into a debt distressed country. And I think you were worried. Somebody being in that space before.
No, it's worrisome. If you look at the numbers, I mean, currently our debt to GDP is about 76%.
Yeah.
And the general rule of thumb is that for an emerging economy, you shouldn't really exceed 70% of GDP.
Yeah.
You know, some people say, oh, USA, Japan has a debt to GDP ratio of 100%.
They have access to back those debts.
Exactly, but they have what they call the institutional quality. Institutional quality means the ability of your institutions to generate the revenue that is needed to service the debt, the capacity of your debt management. All those things are part of institutional quality. So some countries have better institutional quality than others. And so we cannot look at another country's debt to GDP, which is about 90%, and say, oh, we can also do 70%, not quite.
No. But so I come back to the question again. What do you think would be the surest policy measures to implement now to control the debt stock? What do you have to do? Should we stop borrowing?
You can't stop borrowing, but we have to start to manage our expenditures better.
You think is cutting down, drastic expenditure cut could be the best way to deal with the debt stock issue?
I'm not sure drastic is the word, but you should start on that trajectory, the trajectory of reducing the deficit, which makes it necessary for the debt to be incurred in the first place. So we have to try and get on a trajectory that will bring down the deficit.
By cutting down expenditure?
Cutting down expenditure or growing expenditure less.
I see. And then, but the borrowing should still go on.
Oh, I don't really think that as a country we can say we can't borrow. We have to borrow. Look, we have all these Eurobonds outstanding. At the very least, you have to borrow to refinance them. It's just not possible to say that we're going to let all these bonds mature because the cash flows are not there to redeem all of them. And so by some, market engineering, you have to find a way of borrowing to they call it liability management. Find a way of borrowing to refinance maturing debt. So I don't think it's possible to say we won't borrow. You need to borrow, and you need to, and you can make it more efficient in terms of specifying what the borrowing is going to be used for. I think it's always argued and conventionally accepted that if you borrow funds for investment, it makes a lot more sense than borrowing funds for, current consumption.
Consumption.
Exactly. So we can improve the way that we borrow, but it's not possible for any country to say they're not borrowing.
Because if drastic issues call for drastic measures, and maybe it appears that cutting down expenditure alone cannot solve the situation. Because if we should flip into debt distress as a country, has implications as for us as a country. And so maybe just cutting down expenditure might not be the answer.
It's one of a package of things that we have to do. We have to grow revenue, we have to cut expenditure or slow down the rise in the expenditure. We have to manage debt better. Managing it better means intervening in the market to perform debt liability management, to be able to reduce the cost of the debt. So there's efficient debt management is one. Revenue management is the other. Expenditure management is the other one.
But revenue, you talked about revenue, Doc, and I've heard this thing several times. So we need to expand the tax net. At the ministry, is it again the backstops of the political will? Because you look at tax exemptions, and we don't have it, but we keep on giving tax exemptions. And when you scrutinize these exemptions, cronies, friends, and it's a fact. I mean, you've been at the ministry. Yeah. You try to scrutinize persons who are enjoying these tax exemptions, and they are not even the so-called foreign investors. These are friends. These are cronies. These are businesses.
That is where the rubber meets the road, where the politics actually coming to terms with the reality. A lot of things that we do are politically driven. It's not.
That is where the problem is.
It's a serious problem. So we have to take a political economy perspective. Otherwise, we'll be proposing solutions that will never work.
You think that we should take a critical look at that exemptions, that we should deal with it right now? Because that could also be, you look at the numbers, World Bank, IMF, and you're looking at $3 billion, $4 billion exemptions. The argument could also be about...
It's been there for years.
Yeah.
Every government has said that it's going to take a look at exemptions, but they're still...
Why can't we do it?
Politics.
That is our problem, I get from you.
Yes. I think we have to look... Ghana does not really have an economic problem. It has a political economy problem. And if we try to understand the political reasons why things are the way they are, we can start to look for solutions. I think the discussion has been going on, for example, in the recent speech by Dr. Jonah, about our governance system and how it's affecting our economic management. And I think that those issues should be pursued much more aggressively. We saw a Constitutional Review Commission set up by President Arthur Mills, but that got shelved and nothing really happened after that for the next 8 years. So we have to revisit our governance system. The political economy issues can be addressed much more significantly in some of those areas than what we have now.
You think we should? I want to look at the corruption element as well. And some are saying that maybe should we also revise our laws to go after the assets of these people who have misappropriated public funds as well. maybe it could also help. If George ended up taking about $3 billion, or maybe that might be too much, from the Ministry of Finance, when we get George, sacking him and putting him in jail for a year is not enough. Go after the assets.
I think whatever we can do to protect public assets, we should do.
Like what? Punishing them? Going after the assets?
Going after, well, with the courts, we have to use the courts. We have to go after assets. We have to institute, penalties for violations and so forth. Maybe we're not doing it maybe nearly enough of it.
But what has stopped that? Because the laws are there. Being at the Ministry of Finance, you have all the laws in the Financial Administration Act and all the laws to do these things. Again.
But again, laws are, the laws are there, but implementation and enforcement is always a challenge. I mean, we have laws in Ghana to deal with most problems that we would encounter. But implementation and enforcement has always been a big challenge for us.
I see.
There are many things that have happened which have been under investigation and have been under investigation for years. There have been no outcomes. And so what is causing that? The reason this is happening is that a lot of politics goes on. A government comes in, it goes after members of the previous administration. And then there's a change of government. A new government comes in, it goes after the members of the previous administration. And then the cycle goes on. But even many of these are not actually resolved to a clean conclusion. There's still many, many cases that are...
Political will and commitment is a very serious thing.
Yeah, it is.
It'll be a good time, Doc, for us to take a short break. This is PM Express Business Edition. I'm engaging Dr. Sam Mensah. He's a finance economist. He's the chief executive of SEM Capital, and also, say, one of the longest technical advisors at the Ministry of Finance, serving about or engaging about 4 ministers of finance. How difficult or easy it was. We'll be looking at other issues as well, whether the politicians they listen to him, the banking sector, IMF, World Bank, the cedi stability, and all those issues right here on PM Express Business Edition. Right back after this break. Welcome to PM Express Business Edition as we talk about the country's rising. I mean, we've spent a lot of time on the debt stock because it's a very critical situation now. The rising debt stock and even the whole financial sector has been managed. And I'm engaging a former technical advisor at the Ministry of Finance, somebody who served about 4 ministers of finance, Dr. Sam Mensah, a financial economist, and now he's back into the private sector business, chief executive of SEM Capital. And I tried to call him because of a book he's put together, Inside Out, about talking about his experience as at the Ministry of Finance and even in the investment space and all those things, and some interesting developments that is in this book. And if you are watching your screens right now, it's a quote by Dr. Kwesi Botche, who is also one of the longest serving ministers of finance. And it says Dr. Sam Mensah has written an incredibly interesting book, interesting from the point of view that it's illuminating insight into the political economy and policy making, and even more of economic management through this thing of vicissitude of politics under different governments, and also all the ties with the fascinating autobiographical narrative makes it more interesting for everyone to. And I haven't done even half of the book yet. I'm just about 3/4 of that. And the suspense is very, very interesting, Doc. And for you, I would say you were quite bold in putting together all these things. We're a bit talked about what goes into the budget preparations and all those things. Yeah. Why do you have to do that?
Because I felt like I had been extremely lucky, as I said, to get a chance to be in public sector, in the public sector. And it was, I thought I had seen things that I wanted to share with the wider population in terms of, how things are actually done, which we don't see. We hear what happens, but we don't...
Budget being presented at dawn, rushing into the assembly press. I was reading that part and I said, I knew about some of these things, but I never expected that to be captured in the book.
Yeah. So I thought I wanted to share some of these experiences, why certain things appear the way they are. You know, I went through some case studies or some important projects or transactions that we did, like the Ghana Telecom case, and how it ended up the way it did, what we could have done better, and things like that. And hopefully, I think it will benefit others who want to understand the public sector better. And hopefully, I hope that I have is that will encourage more people like myself in the private sector to take an interest
in public
service. Yeah. And also encourage others to write their memoirs.
Maybe I'll be doing that very soon
Wonderful.
myself and reporting on the financial space for a while now.
Yeah.
Maybe interesting things I've engaged on scene and off record. But again, engaging all these 4 ministers of finance, working as one of the closest people as well, what do you think was their biggest challenge as a finance minister? Was it the political? Because the finance minister is very powerful.
Extremely powerful.
What was the biggest challenge?
The big challenge that is what you already talked about, balancing politics and economics.
Politics was the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
They knew the right things to do.
But maybe they were only right from an economic point of view, not from a political point of view. So I think that's a big challenge for a Minister of Finance. You know, the political imperative is very strong.
The pressure was too much.
Pressure, a lot of pressure. These guys actually...
How bad was this pressure on these ministers of finance? Engaging all these 4 of them and working closely with them?
It's a difficult job, you know.
You get the big money, you are very powerful. Why is it difficult? You are being paid for the job you're doing.
Well, because it's a complex environment and the workload is extremely heavy. I think your typical finance minister would only get a couple of hours of sleep every night because you're working
3 hours, 2 hours.
very, very little.
A typical CFO in a bank might be doing sometimes even an hour, 2 hours. Some would say.
Yeah, because there are times when I would get a phone call from a minister at midnight, struggling with something that we had been dealing with, and suddenly he gets a brainwave, and he wants to discuss it. And so it's a difficult job. You have to take care of so many interests, including the interests of your party. Because remember, one of the qualifications for becoming a minister is also your loyalty to
the party.
So,
but is it right?
Under the present political system, that is how it works. We elect parties, and they provide us with a government. So the party is important in the minister's choices.
Let's look at the banking sector cleanup, and it keeps on coming up. And the Ministry of Finance played a critical role in this. And I mean, for you, there's talk about it bringing confidence and all the rest and blah, blah, but could it have been done in a better way?
The banking system?
The cleanup.
The cleanup. Well, again, you know, I'm not sure that it's so easy to say yes or no.
So bail them out, bring in management in to manage the banks, clear the money, because it was a managerial decision and all the rest, than to close them down, and some are saying that all sort of problems.
Yeah. I mean, we don't know what would have happened if we had continued without the cleanup. Okay. And for a country, this is actually our first experience. Maybe with this experience, the next time around, we might approach it differently. But something needed to be done. And I really wouldn't fault the government of the day for taking a stand and approaching it one way. Okay. Another government might have approached it differently. But we don't really know the outcome that could have, you know, we would have ended up with in that scenario either. So many countries have gone through financial sector cleanup. Nigeria did the same. Korea did the same. And it ended up with the same result. Banks were de-licensed. The licenses were cancelled. We ended up with a fewer number of banks, well-capitalized banks. So there are precedents for this kind of restructuring. So I don't want to pretend that I have an answer to how it could have been done better.
The Ghana cedi stability, there are several arguments about the fact that it's more of a fiscal issue than a monetary thing. I mean, what do you think can be done to firmly, every currency on the world is exposed to blips, but to firmly stabilize the cedi?
Okay, I mean, the blips are there because of, short-term flows. Okay, so that you're right, that will always be there. But I think, and this point has been made many times, I think that the fundamental approach is really to increase our foreign exchange earnings.
Export more.
Over the long run, export more, import less. And that is really determined by the structure of your economy. As the structure of economy shifts in favor of more exports, more value added, I think it will always also have a long-term impact on the stability of the city. Within that context, of course, you have, short-term movements, seasonalities, and so forth. Sometimes the city might drip badly, but ultimately, it's the structure of the economy.
Where we are prone to more export, that could help.
Exactly, and also we are prone to commodity cycles. Cocoa goes through a bubble and then suddenly it's down, and then we are losing that foreign exchange. Gold goes through that cycle, oil goes through that cycle. So I think the structure of economy has a lot to do with it. Yeah.
When you engage some of the civil society groups, the trade union congress and all the rest, there's always a name they don't want to hear, the IMF and the World Bank. From your engagement again, do you think that, listen, we need these institutions, but it's about how we tactfully engage them in terms of their policy proposals and all the rest? Because there are some who think that our current economic predicament is because of our association with the IMF and the several policy proposals from the IMF and the World Bank.
It's a long.
But just in brief, I mean, for you, what do you think that it's just how it's been?
But the way the IMF is set up, the IMF does not come and take over our country. You go to the IMF when you have trouble and you have nowhere else to turn. By the time you get to the IMF, your system is already broken.
Last resort.
Last resort. And therefore, when they come in, they are only going to give you a financial package on condition that you fix your system.
You do what
so that you don't have to
supposed to do.
Exactly, you don't have to come back. So I think there's a bit of education that is needed here in terms of what the IMF actually stands for, why it is there, and its modus operandi. It's just the case that we go there because we have messed up, and we ask them for assistance to straighten out our economy. But it's not because they just come in and take over.
So if you fix things well, you will not even need it. What we do is a normal Article 4 consultation that will go on. But
on the occasions that we've exited, from the IMF, we've gone back. I must say, I found that disappointing, but that's the reality.
You think we could go back again?
I certainly hope not.
But do you think that we could go back again? I mean,
oh, it's possible. Remember that sometimes you can have economic shocks.
Do you foresee economic shocks?
Economic shocks are possible. The reason why it's a shock, the reason why it's a shock is that you can't foresee it. But it's possible. The typical kind of shock that we might have, like Corona, is a shock. It's a major economic shock. So we have that. We have commodity price shocks. Oil, especially. Gold is misbehaving lately. So you can have price shocks that you did not anticipate. So if your economy is a commodity-dependent economy, you might rush the IMF not because of anything you've done, but it's because of the structure of the economy that you have. So
it's in.
I cannot say that we will never go back to the IMF.
It could happen soon if we're exposed to all this. But also, having spent 10 years at the Ministry of Finance, and there's always been this complaint about, and sorry that time, in just a minute I could say, in wrapping up, would you encourage private sector to go into public service to help?
Absolutely. I hope that the little bit that I've done would encourage, some private sector players to go to government and basically pass on their knowledge and also learn, learn from government, so that they can come back and then be more enlightened, more educated, more knowledgeable about government.
Time is not outside. In 15 seconds, where can I get this book to buy and when will it be launched, Doc? In 15 seconds. Time is not outside.
We're launching in about 2 weeks. The date will be announced.
Yeah.
Where can I currently, the book has been launched already on Amazon.com for those of you who are outside Ghana.
Okay.
And then here you have Kingdom Books. Kingdom is one of the outlets.
Okay.
And I think it's Vidia Bookshop. Yeah.
Okay. Doc, thank you so much for your time. And if you want to get a deeper understanding of what goes in at the Ministry of Finance, Governance and Finance, maybe I'll do a further. You need to get this book. My name is George Yaffe. We'll be talking about debt, finance, banking issues, cedi, the IMF, and public service and private service as well. Have a great day. This is PM Express Business Edition.